The last battleship duel in history didn't happen the way most people think. It wasn't two massive fleets charging at each other out in the open ocean. It wasn't some dramatic showdown where both sides saw each other coming from miles away. No, one side had no idea what was waiting for them in the dark. And by the time they figured it out, it was already over. It's October 1944. The war in the Pacific is at a turning point. American forces are pushing hard toward the Philippines, and Japan knows that if they lose the Philippines, they lose everything. Their supply lines, their oil, their ability to keep fighting. So Japan comes up with a plan. A massive all-or-nothing plan to destroy the American fleet and stop the invasion before it even gets started. They call it Operation Shogo, and it involves sending almost every major warship they have left. But what Japan didn't know, what they couldn't have known, is that the Americans were ready. Not just ready. They had built a trap so perfectly designed that it read like something out of a textbook. This is the story of the Battle of Surigao Strait, the last time in history that battleships fought battleships, and one of the most one-sided naval ambushes ever pulled off. To understand what happened at Surigao Strait, you need to understand how desperate Japan was at this point in the war. By late 1944, Japan had already lost most of its experienced pilots. Their aircraft carriers were almost empty, not because the ships were gone, but because there were barely any trained pilots left to fly off them. The great naval air battles of 1942 and 1943 had drained Japan dry of the people who knew how to fight in the air. So Japan pivoted. If they couldn't win with air power, they would try to win with steel. Battleships, the biggest guns they had left. Old school, brutal, close-range firepower. Operation Shogo was designed around a three-pronged attack on Leyte Gulf, where the American invasion fleet was sitting. The idea was to hit the Americans from multiple directions at the same time so they couldn't respond to all of it at once. One group of ships, the most powerful, would come from the north, another would swing around from the south, and a decoy force with the remaining carriers would try to pull the main American fleet away from the action. The southern force, the one heading toward Surigao Strait, was commanded by Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura. He had two of Japan's oldest battleships, the Yamashiro and the Fuso, along with a heavy cruiser and 4 destroyers. Their job was to push through Surigao Strait at night, get into Leyte Gulf, and hit the American invasion ships from behind while the northern force hit them from the front. It sounded like a plan, on paper. But here's the thing about Surigao Strait. It's not open water. It's a narrow channel, about 15 miles wide at most, running between islands. And to get through it, Nishimura's ships would have to travel in a long single-file line, which meant that whoever was waiting at the other end would have a perfect angle on every ship as they came through one by one. And waiting at the other end was Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf. And he had spent the past several hours setting up something that naval commanders dream about. Oldendorf had 6 battleships, 8 cruisers, and almost 30 destroyers under his command. And he had intelligence. American code breakers and patrol submarines had spotted Nishimura's force hours before they entered the strait. So Oldendorf had time to plan, time to position, time to make sure that when the Japanese came through that narrow channel, there would be nowhere for them to go. Here's what he set up. At the northern end of the strait, where it opens up into Leyte Gulf, Oldendorf placed his 6 battleships and 8 cruisers in a line running east to west across the mouth of the channel. Not along the channel, across it. This is the part that naval historians still talk about. Crossing the T. Crossing the T is one of the oldest and most powerful tactics in naval warfare. The idea is simple. If your enemy is sailing toward you in a line, and you position your ships sideways across their path, your entire fleet can fire its guns at them, all your guns pointing forward. But the enemy ships, the ones at the front of their line, can only fire the guns pointing to the side. The ships behind them can't fire at all because their own ships are in the way. Your firepower versus maybe 20% of theirs. It's the naval equivalent of an ambush at a doorway. One side controls the door. Everyone trying to come through is exposed. Everyone defending it is protected. And Nishimura was about to walk straight into it. But Oldendorf didn't just set up the battleships and call it a day. He layered this trap in a way that made it almost inescapable. On both sides of the strait, tucked in close to the islands, he positioned his PT boats, small, fast torpedo boats that would be the first to make contact with the Japanese. Their job wasn't to destroy Nishimura's force. Their job was to watch, report, and harass. Slow the Japanese down if possible. Make noise, buy time. Behind the PT boats, spread across the strait, were his destroyers, split into groups on both sides of the channel. When the time was right, they would charge at the Japanese from the sides, fire their torpedoes, and then get out of the way before the battleships opened up. And then, at the very top, at the mouth of the strait, sat the battleships and cruisers, silent, waiting, guns loaded. Every layer of this trap was designed to funnel the Japanese forward, into the guns at the end. There was no route around it, no space to maneuver. The narrow walls of the strait on either side made sure of that. Nishimura didn't know any of this. He knew he might face some resistance. He knew the Americans were somewhere in the Gulf, but the full picture of what was waiting for him, 6 battleships sitting across the end of a channel he had to go through, that he did not know. And he kept going anyway. It was just after midnight on October 25, 1944. Nishimura's force was moving north through the strait in a line, with his flagship Yamashiro at the front. The Fuso was behind it, then the cruiser, then the 4 destroyers trailing at the back. The PT boats made first contact. They attacked in waves, firing torpedoes, and then pulling back into the darkness. Most of the torpedoes missed. PT boats were hard to aim from, and the night made it harder. But the Japanese ships had to keep turning and maneuvering to avoid them. It cost them time, it disrupted the formation, and every move Nishimura's ships made was being tracked and reported back to Oldendorf. Then the American destroyers came in. From both sides of the strait, they charged straight at the Japanese column at high speed, firing torpedoes and then spinning hard to get out of the way before the big guns could respond. It was chaotic and brutal. The Fuso was hit by 2 torpedoes from the destroyer Melvin. The hits broke the battleship in half. Both halves stayed afloat, on fire, drifting. Sailors were dying in the dark water around the wreck. 3 of Nishimura's 4 destroyers were also hit and sunk during this phase. 1 survived. The Japanese force was already badly damaged, and they still hadn't reached the end of the strait. Nishimura on the Yamashiro kept going. At around 3:50 in the morning, the American battleships and cruisers at the top of the strait opened fire. What happened next was not a battle in any equal sense. The 6 American battleships, 5 of which had actually been damaged or sunk at Pearl Harbor and rebuilt, unleashed everything they had. Their radar was locked onto the incoming Japanese ships. They could see every target clearly in the dark. The Japanese, blinded by searchlights and explosions and the chaos of the destroyer attacks, could barely see where the fire was coming from. The Yamashiro was hit again and again. Shells tore through her deck, her hull, her turrets. She kept firing back, but there was almost nothing she could do. The geometry of the situation, sailing in a straight line toward a row of ships firing from the side, meant she was fully exposed while her angle of attack was almost useless. At 4:19 a.m., the Yamashiro rolled over and sank. Nishimura went down with his ship. The Japanese heavy cruiser Mogami, badly damaged, tried to retreat south. It eventually sank later that day. The single surviving destroyer made it out. Out of the entire southern force, 2 battleships, 1 heavy cruiser, 4 destroyers, only 1 destroyer escaped. The American losses? 1 PT boat sunk, light damage on a few destroyers, no battleships, no cruisers even seriously hurt. The Battle of Surigao Strait lasted only a few hours, but what it meant stretched far beyond that single night. It was the last time in history that battleships fought battleships. After Surigao Strait, the era of the big gun duel was over. The war had already shifted to aircraft and carriers. Surigao Strait was almost a farewell to an old way of fighting at sea. But more than that, it showed what happens when one side has information, preparation, and the patience to wait for the right moment, and the other side has none of those things. Nishimura's force wasn't destroyed because the Japanese sailors fought badly. By all accounts, they kept moving forward even as ships around them were sinking. That took a specific kind of courage. But courage doesn't fix bad positioning. Courage doesn't fix the fact that you're sailing single file into a channel where 6 battleships are lined up sideways waiting for you. Oldendorf didn't win because he was lucky. He won because he used everything available to him: intelligence, geography, timing, layered defenses, to make the outcome as close to certain as possible before the first shot was even fired. The Japanese plan, Operation Shogo, failed across the board. The decoy worked. It pulled Admiral Halsey's main fleet north, away from the battle, but the forces attacking from the south and center couldn't capitalize on it. Leyte Gulf, as a whole, was the largest naval battle in history, and it ended with Japan's navy effectively finished as a fighting force. After Leyte Gulf, Japan still had ships, but they couldn't fuel them, couldn't replace the crews, couldn't protect them from American air power. The fleet that had attacked Pearl Harbor, that had swept across the Pacific in 1941 and 1942, was gone in any meaningful sense. Surigao Strait was the final chapter of a very old kind of war. Big ships, big guns, 2 lines of steel meeting in the dark, and one side never had a chance. The ocean has seen battles far more intense than most people realize. If you want to uncover the ones history books barely mention, subscribe and keep watching.